The 11-hour and 14-hour limits help to prevent day-to-day fatigue. But as you well know, fatigue can also build up from working long hours day after day. That's where the 60-hour and 70-hour limits come into play. The 60-hour rule says that you must stop driving a commercial motor vehicle after you've accumulated 60 hours of on-duty time in a 7-day period. This rule applies to drivers who work for motor carriers that do not operate commercial motor vehicles every day of the week. The 70-hour rule says you must stop driving after you've accumulated 70 hours of on-duty time in an 8-day period. This rule applies to drivers who drive for motor carriers that do operate CMVs every day of the week. Under both the 60-hour and 70-hour rules, you may continue to perform non-driving duties after you've hit the limits. But all hours must be included when calculating your total hours. So, what hours are counted towards your 60 or 70-hour limit? The answer is all driving time and all on-duty time. Since this rule concerns a 7-day or an 8-day time period, it's useful to think about what constitutes a day. For this rule, a day is a 24-hour period, but each motor carrier can decide when the day begins, usually at midnight. The important thing is that the starting time of day selected by your motor carrier must match the starting time of day in your logbook or electronic logging device, or ELD. Another important note, the 60-hour or 70-hour period refers to the previous 7 or 8 days. It does not relate to a specific work week like a Sunday through Saturday time period. When an officer looks at your log, he or she will be adding up the days prior to the inspection, regardless of which days of the week they fall on. There is an optional provision that you can use that allows you to restart the 60-hour or 70-hour time period, and that's the 34-hour restart. This provision allows you to restart your 60 or 70-hour clock after having at least 34 consecutive hours off duty. In order to use this provision, your restart must include 2 back-to-back nighttime rest periods from 1 a.m. to 5 a.m. Depending on your driving schedule, you may need to take more than 34 hours off duty to meet this requirement. Also, the 34-hour restart can only be used once per 168 consecutive hours. That's once every 7 days. This means that once you've used the 34-hour restart, you cannot begin your next restart until at least 168 hours have passed since the beginning of your previous restart. For example, if your 34-hour restart begins at 3 p.m. on Friday, you may not begin a new 34-hour restart until at least 3 p.m. the following Friday. Note that this provision does not prohibit you from taking more than one 34 or more consecutive hour period of time off per week, but you may only use one of those breaks as the 34-hour restart. If you have 2 34-hour breaks within 168 hours in your log, you must indicate which you consider the restart break. It's important to know that the 34 hours must be spent off duty or in the sleeper berth, and the hours must be consecutive. Any on-duty activities, like maintenance, fueling, or repairs, will invalidate the restart. Let's take another look at our driver, and let's assume that he operates under the 60-hour, 7-day limit. He starts work on Wednesday and is on duty for 14 hours each day for the next 3 days, Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday. On Saturday, he is on duty for 11 hours for a total of 53 hours. By doing a recap summary of his previous 6 days, he can see that he had 0 hours on Monday, 0 hours on Tuesday, 14 hours on Wednesday, 14 hours on Thursday, 14 hours on Friday, and 11 hours on Saturday, which leaves him with 7 hours of on-duty time available on Sunday. However, if he is off-duty on Sunday and Monday, and that off-duty time adds up to 34 consecutive hours, and includes the periods between 1 a.m. and 5 a.m. on both Sunday and Monday, remember, there have to be two 1 a.m. to 5 a.m. periods in order to use the 34-hour restart. He can restart his 60 hours after the full 34 hours of off-duty time has elapsed. His next 60 hours on duty can follow a similar schedule with one exception. His next 34-hour restart cannot begin until 168 hours have elapsed since the starting time of his previous restart on the previous Sunday. With this example in mind, you can see how critical it is to keep a running recap of your hours on duty for the previous 6 days, so you know how many hours you can drive the following day and still remain in compliance. How do enforcement officers in the FMCSA know that you're complying with the hours of service regulations? Simple. You tell them in your logs. Or if your motor carrier uses an electronic system, you record your hours using an ELD. Keeping your log up to date, truthful, and accurate is the most important thing you can do to remain in compliance. Because if your log is current, truthful, and your math is correct, you'll always know where you stand when you hand your log to an officer. The graph grid is at the heart of the record of duty status. This grid tracks your time for an entire 24-hour period in 4 categories, commonly called duty lines: off-duty, sleeper berth, driving, and on-duty, not driving. If your motor carrier does not use vehicles with sleeper berths, that category may be absent on your log page. Some motor carriers involved in specialized work will also have a 5th line for other information. The log must also have a remarks section. This is the place on the log used to record the location of each change of duty status. When there is a change of duty status on the log, you must indicate, at the appropriate time, the city and state in which this change occurred. If you're not in a city or state, then you must describe the location, such as an intersection or mile marker or road, followed by the nearest city and state. Beyond the graph grid, certain information must be present on your log. Today's date. The total number of miles you drove a CMV today. The identifying numbers assigned to the vehicle and trailer you drove today. The name of the motor carrier or carriers you're driving for. The address of the motor carrier's main office. Your signature. The starting time for the 24-hour day covered by the log page. The total hours you spent on each duty status. An area for remarks. The name of your co-driver if you're part of a team. And shipping document numbers or the name of the shipper and commodity being shipped. The log must be done in duplicate, an original and a copy, and it must be done for each day. Also, it must be completed in your own legible handwriting. The entire 24 hours must be shown in the grid. Don't leave any time unaccounted for. You're either off duty, on duty, driving, or in the sleeper. No time should be left blank. So, how long must you retain your log? The regs require you to have copies of the current day's log plus the previous 7 days with you in the cab. Otherwise, how would officers know that you're in compliance with the 60-hour or 70-hour rules? And you have 13 days to deliver a copy to your motor carrier using mail, scanning, drop-off, or some other procedure. However, many motor carriers will require the logs and all trip paperwork to be submitted immediately upon completion of the documents or completion of the trip. In practice, very few motor carriers actually give their drivers 13 days to turn in a log. Be sure to follow your motor carrier's policy on submitting logs. Your motor carrier must keep the log plus any supporting documents, such as fuel receipts or toll tickets, for 6 months. That way, if there's an FMCSA inspection or investigation, the inspector can review all drivers' logs to ensure compliance. If the inspector finds problems, you and your motor carrier can be held accountable for violations. Just because you didn't get caught on the road doesn't mean you're off the hook. You can still be fined for over hours or false logs if your motor carrier is investigated during the 6 months your logs are on file. Some motor carriers prefer using an electronic logging device, an ELD, rather than paper logs. If this is the case with your motor carrier, the device must contain all the same items required on the paper log. While not normally required, if you do print from an ELD, you must sign the paper. Whether you use an ELD or a paper log, when asked by an officer, you must be able to produce a log for the current day and the previous 7 days. And it must be current up to your last change of duty status. So be prepared to show the officer a paper log or an ELD display if asked. In the event of an ELD's failure, you must be prepared to reconstruct the current day's log and any logs from the previous 7 days that the device is unable to display. And you should be prepared to maintain a handwritten paper log until the unit is repaired or replaced. Like a paper log, the ELD should be with you in the cab, and you must carry instructions on how to store and retrieve data from the device in the vehicle, along with a list of any codes the ELD uses and their meanings. If the device you use is not an approved ELD, such as a laptop, smartphone, or tablet, that is not automatically collecting data from the vehicle to determine when you're driving, then you must be able to print your logs on paper if requested by an officer. And you must have the hardware to do so. Don't expect the officer to provide the printer or review your log on the device's screen.